Hello, welcome to another video. This is a video on how to play chess. And so in this video, we'll go over the basic rules of chess. We'll go over some of the common strategies, and we'll go over some tips as well. However, this will not encompass all the rules of chess, simply because not only are some of the more advanced techniques and more advanced rules quite hard, they also take a very long time to explain. And furthermore, if you're just starting out, it does not make sense to try to incorporate all of those at the same time. And so right now we will just begin with the basic rules. So what is chess? Well, chess is a game that was invented about, there's no exact pinpoint on the origins, but it's a very tactful and skillful game. And it's often denoted as being a game that requires high cognitive thinking. And this is true. There are many chess moves that you can make, and there are many ways that you can play chess. And so there's a stereotype that people who play chess are smart, and chess has been shown to improve your cognitive ability. So without further ado, let's just talk about how to set up the chessboard. So at the beginning of the game, first, when you're starting out with a chessboard, in this case it's digital, so it's done for me. But if you have a chessboard, you have to lay it out in a manner such that the white square or the light color square is on the bottom right hand side for each player. So if I'm looking at it, if I'm sitting here near the bottom, the white square, so I'm sitting on this side of the board, the white square is on my bottom right. If somebody is sitting on that side of the board, on the top side of the board, and they're looking at the board from their perspective, the white square is on their bottom right. Similarly, the left square is on their bottom left. The black square is on their bottom left, and the black square is on my bottom left. This is important. Obviously, when you want to play chess, you want to make sure your chessboard is actually set up properly. Next, we have to actually get chess pieces on the board. And so the chess pieces are arranged the exact same way every time. So let's first arrange the second row. The second row is filled with pawns. Pawns are, I guess, I don't really know how to describe the shape of them, but they're this common shape right here. And so you fill the second row with pawns. One side is the white color, one side is the black color. They don't have much difference other than the fact that the player who has the white pieces gets to move first. And in chess, this is often seen as an advantage, because in chess, being aggressive is typically the more rewarding play style. And so let's just fill up our row. And so we filled up our chessboard. We filled up the second row of our chessboard. We haven't filled up our chessboard yet. And now, in the bottom left and bottom right corners, you place what is called the rook. So the rook is this castle-looking shape. And same thing here on the black side. We place the rook. And then beside the rook, you place a knight. Each player gets two knights. The knights are, I guess, the ones that look like horses. And then beside the knights, you place the bishops. So once again, each player has two bishops. And this is just setting up the chessboard, but this is important as well. You can't play chess properly unless you don't set up the board. And now we have two squares left. And from these pieces, what pieces have we not used? Well, I think everybody who knows at least a bit about chess knows about the king and the queen. We have yet to place the king and the queen. So the king goes beside the, I guess, well, from my perspective, the bishop on the left. But the kings are always directly across each other. And so, sorry, that was the queen. My apologies. The queens are always directly across from each other. And then you have the king, which is also directly across from one another, like so. Now that we've set up our board, let's actually begin talking about the pieces. So there are 6 pieces in chess. There's the pawn, the knight, the bishop, the rook, the king, and the queen. And so these pieces can't move through other pieces. So I can't just say, let's say I have, well, a good example is, so you can move a pawn forward 1 or 2. And a good example is the rook. So we'll get into this later, but the rook can move vertically. And so notice how I can't move to this square or this square. I only have one possibility there. I cannot just move through this pawn. I can't just move through the pawn. And so essentially, I mean, that's not a legal move, but I just put it back there simply to reset the board. You cannot move through another piece, which was my demonstration. However, you can move to your opponent's piece to capture them. So let's say we move a pawn forward twice, and then we move this pawn forward like so once. Then the opponent moves their pawn forward. We can move directly on the opponent, and that is actually how you capture a piece in chess. And notice now the opponent does not have their black pawn. We've captured it. Now I'm going to reset the board just for the sake of it. And so those are the basic ideas. And so you want to move your pieces into positions where you can capture another piece or defend your own piece. And there's a third case. A lot of people, when they play chess, they play it for the objective. They're just fully focused on capturing the opponent's pieces. However, you also want to control the important squares in the game. The important squares in the game are the squares in the middle of the board because they dictate the mobility. If you control these squares, the opponent's effectively pinned against their own, I guess, back of the board. And that's very bad because it means they cannot get the maximum power out of their pieces. And so first let's talk about the king. So the king is the most important piece in chess. The most important piece in chess. And so I'm actually just going to clear the board. I know we spent a lot of time setting it up, but just to demonstrate what the king is about. So let's say we have our king, and he's right there. So first of all, the king is the most important piece in the game. This literally dictates your life in the game. If you lose your king, you're out of the game. That's why you hear the word checkmate sometimes. However, you might sit here and say, well, if the king's the most important piece in the game, it might be the most powerful piece in the game. And that's actually not true. The king is one of the most weak pieces in the game. The king can move one square in any direction, up, down, to the sides, or diagonally. So let's say I highlight this king. As you can see, there's dots all over diagonally. So I can move anywhere. I can move here, pick that up. I can move diagonal, pick that up. I can move diagonal. I can move to the left or to the right. Anywhere one square in a vicinity. So let's say you have a king in the middle, in I guess the 9 squares around the king. Now, the objective of chess is to checkmate the king. Both players only have one king. And there's a maneuver called check. And check is where your king is in a position to be captured by another piece. So let's say my opponent has a pawn, and a pawn can capture a piece diagonally. So notice, so a pawn can capture a piece diagonal from it. So if I move my king here, the pawn would be able to capture me. And notice these dots. There's no dot there. That's not a valid move. I cannot, even if I wanted to, it's not a valid move. You cannot move your king in check. You cannot do it. And so this pawn can capture diagonally, but I cannot move my king in check. And so because of that, because of this, we do not have to worry about accidentally putting our player into check. I guess if both players are not knowledgeable, then you could accidentally put your king into check. But in terms of an actual legal chess match, no, you cannot do it. This is not a valid move. And that is the king. So we're done with the king. Now let's talk about the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece in chess. Let me pick up the queen for a second. You see all those dots? The queen can move anywhere. Forward, back, left, right, diagonal, for as many squares as she wants without falling off the board, of course. And as long as, with any piece, as long as she does not move through her own piece. So let's say I have a pawn right there. We noticed that the queen before, she can move all the way. She could move all the way to this side of the board. But since there's a pawn blocking this diagonal range of motion, it's restricted. She cannot go through her pieces. And so, what does this mean? Well, first of all, if the queen captures an opponent's piece, her move is over. So let's say I have a black pawn right there, and the queen moves to capture it. I can't just capture that piece and go, oh, I want to move my queen back. No. Once you capture a piece, in chess, capturing a piece always ends the move. Now, that is out of the way. The queen is a very powerful piece, but it's not that hard to grasp. Now, let's move to the next piece. That's going to be a rook. So, the rook is the one that looks like a castle. Now, the rook is similar to the queen in that the rook can move anywhere. However, it can only move to the left, up, right, or down. It cannot move diagonal. And so, in terms of its range of motion, it can move as far as it wants along the board. So it's similar to the queen in that regard. However, it differs in that it cannot move diagonally. Now, that gets the rook out of the way. And remember, you get two rooks. So these are two powerful pieces. Now, with that out of the way, let us talk about the bishop. So, the bishop is the one... No, sorry. Not the knight. The bishop is the one that looks... I guess... I don't know how to describe it. Looks kind of like... I don't know. But the bishop is also special. It is like the queen in that it can move anywhere diagonally on the board. However, it's restricted to diagonal motion. Cannot move vertically. So, what the rook lacks in diagonal movement, the bishop makes up for in diagonal movement. What the bishop lacks in in lateral movement, straight movements, the rook makes up for with great movement laterally, forward, back, left, and right. You have two bishops. And so the way they're set up on the board initially is you have one bishop over here. Well, I'm on this side at least. And then you'd have one bishop over here. And notice the color of the squares under the bishop. You have a white square under one bishop, and I guess a green square, or it depends on the color of your chessboard, a dark square, whatever. So basically a light square and a dark square. And notice that the bishop can only move diagonally. So if I pick up the bishop on the dark square, can he move to any light square? No, he cannot. This is true no matter where I move the bishop. I move the bishop here, I move the bishop here, I move the bishop here. The bishop cannot move to any light square, provided that it started on the dark square. So let's look at the bishop on the light square. Its only possible moves are moving to another light square, and this is because it moves diagonal. So the way the chessboard is positioned, going to move diagonal. So what does this mean? A bishop cannot block another bishop. So let's say I put these bishops together. You might be like, hey, what if it blocks the path of the other bishop? It can't, because they use different squares. Your two bishops use different squares. So you're not restricted in your motion. You're restricted in your motion by other pieces, but not by the bishop. Once again, if you have another piece with the bishop, your own piece, you cannot simply move through it. And so if you look at this white bishop, you should normally be able to move diagonally to all four white squares, but once again, you cannot move through that piece, so that's not a valid... I mean, it worked right there because we're in a demo mode, but that is not a valid move. And so now, let's go to the knight. The knight is special. The knight's a special piece. It moves in a different way from every other piece. It can move in two directions in one move, rather than one direction. So the way the knight works is it goes two squares in one direction, and then one more square at a 90-degree angle. It forms an L. So let's say I go 1, 2, and then a 90-degree, 3. That's an L. 1, 2, 90-degree. That's the third move. 3. That's an L. 1, 2, 90-degree, 3. That's an L. 1, 2, 90-degree, 3. That's an L. Obviously, you can only do straight up and down and left and right movements, but it can move at 90 degrees, and that's what makes it so powerful. It is also, well, that is a pretty cool piece, but what's more cool is that the knight is also the only piece in chess that can jump over any other piece. And so let's say I don't have a knight here. Let's just get that out of the way. Let's say I have a rook, just to demo this. The rook cannot move to the right because the pawn is blocking it. However, if I have a knight, the knight is not blocked. 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 90 degree, 3. 1, 2, 90 degree, 3. 1, 2, 90 degree, 3. Let's get another pawn right here. 1, 2, 90 degree, 3. 1, 2, 90 degrees, the third move. The pawn can be jumped over. And it doesn't matter what piece it is. It doesn't matter if it's the almighty queen or anything like that. The knight can jump over any piece in chess. And so we've gone through a lot of the pieces, but there's one basic piece, and it's the piece you have the most of, and we haven't gone over that yet, and that's the pawn. So how do pawns work? Pawns are a weird piece, but they're abundant, and so they move forward. So a pawn moves forward. 1, 1. I can only move forward with the pawn. Look, I cannot make any movements to the side. The dots indicate a valid move, and right now I can't make any valid move. So we'll talk about that later as well. But basically, a pawn can only move forward. However, you might be saying, okay, so if I have an opponent in front of me, I can capture them. Nope, you cannot do that. That is not a valid move. That is not a valid, my apologies. That is not a valid move. The only way you can capture any piece, not just a pawn, any piece, so a pawn can even capture the queen, is by moving diagonally on it. And it's hard to see, but if you look closely, you can see that there's a dot. You can see that there is a dot underneath. And so this indicates that this is a valid move. And so a pawn can only move forward, but it can only capture diagonally. And so let's talk about, also, before we get to the prompt that we had before, on the first turn, so on the first turn, a pawn can move forward twice. Look at those two dots. Normally a pawn can only move forward 1 square, but on the first turn, you can move forward 2 squares. So that's the specialty of a pawn. However, you might say, okay, well, does that mean I can capture 2 squares diagonally on the first turn? No. Even on the first turn, if by some magic, although I don't know how this would happen, if there was a piece within reach, you can only move for 1 square diagonally to capture the piece. And so, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the prompt that we had before. So let's say we move our pawn forward, move our pawn forward, move our pawn forward, move our pawn forward, and then we get to the end. You can make your pawn any chess piece, and you might say, okay, well, there's 6 chess pieces, but there's only 4 here. First of all, you can't keep your pawn into a pawn. You can't get to the end of the board and just make your pawn a pawn. And so this is what this means is getting to the end of the board. It's called a promotion. We know that pawns can only move forward. So eventually, given enough moves, a pawn will reach the end of the board. And getting to the end of your opponent's chessboard without them capturing you is a pretty big deal. And so what this does is it gives you the ability to turn your pawn into any piece in the game. And now you might say, oh, well, knights have this ability, rooks have this ability, bishops have this ability. No. The queen is the most powerful piece in the game, and it is just accepted. It's just common logic to turn your pawn into a queen once you get to the end of the board. Not doing so, you're effectively hurting yourself by not doing so. Also, you might say, okay, well, we have a pawn. We can't turn a pawn into a pawn. What about the king? the king is your life. You cannot buy more than one life in chess. If you had more than one king, the opponent would have to check you twice, and that's just not how chess works. You can only have one king. Thus, you can only turn your pawn into the 4 pieces listed here: the queen, the knight, the rook, and the bishop. However, it's most advisable to promote your pawn to the queen. So, now that that's the basic rules are out of the way, there's a bit more. Well, this is a video on the basic rules, but there's a bit more we need to cover. So, let's say we have a king here, and we have a bishop, and bishop can move diagonally. And so I can actually move and capture that king. So, let's say it's black's turn. What can let's say it's black's turn. What can black do? Can black simply say, hey, I don't really care, I'm going to move another piece on my board? No. This configuration, where the opponent has a possibility of capturing your king, this is called check. And you have to deal with check. You cannot ignore it. It is a rule. You have to try to stop it. So if my king's there, I have to do something to stop it. So what can I do? Well, if I'm black, I can move my king over 1. The bishop's not going to capture it. That stops the check. What else can I do? So let's have a king here, and I have a rook here. I can also move another piece in front of it. What does that do? Remember, the bishop can't jump over pieces, so it could capture my rook, but it saves my king. Now, that's a sacrifice you have to make because your king is your life. And what's the third best way? Well, let's say I have... So there's 2 ways. You can either move the king away, block the king with another defending piece which sacrifices, or you can capture the piece which is threatening to check your king. So in this case, I have a bishop on the dark square. A bishop can move diagonal, and so I can capture this, and that also removes the threat of check. And so that's basically what check is. Check is the act of your king being in danger, and those are the 3 most common methods to get your king out of check. There is one more, but this is a basic video, and that's pretty advanced. Not only is it time consuming to learn about, but it's better to stick with the basics first. So now that we got through all the rules, what are some basic tips? Protect your king. So protect your king. So I have my king. Well, both teams have their king right here. It's advisable to get your king to either corner of the board. The reason being, bishops can move diagonally, and so they could probably save your king. If you can move diagonally, you can move diagonally all the way across the board. So if your king's about to be checked, if your king's in the corner, bishop can come in and block that check or capture the checking piece. Your queen as well can move in any direction. So if your king's in the corner, it's also safer that way. Probability tells us if the king is in the corner, there are only 3 squares touching it. There's only these 3 directions from which it could be captured. Versus if my king is here in the middle, and obviously that's not a valid move, so I can't even do that. But let's say my king is right here in the middle. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 squares. Oh, I think I said 9 earlier. My apologies. So there's 8 squares around the king. 3 squares versus 8 squares. If there's 8 squares around the king, that's 8 directions he can be captured from. If there's 3 squares around the king, that's 3 directions he can be captured from. Therefore, get your king to the corner of your chessboard as quick as possible. What's another thing? Don't give pieces away. Don't just be like, hey, oh, this is a pawn, I don't care, I'm going to move it. I'm going to move it in the proximity. Don't just be like, hey, oh no, who cares, it's just a pawn, capture it. Nobody cares. I mean, I guess I can't do it right now because I'm not the opponent. So I will just have to stop this. My apologies. My apologies. Reset. There's a bit of a little bit of adversity here. Okay, well, I don't know what happened, but we'll work with what we have. And now, so don't just carelessly lose your pieces. And now you might say, okay, well, I'm new to chess. How do I know how valuable each piece is? Well, first of all, each piece is very valuable. A pawn, but there's a point system you can use if you're new to chess. So we can say that a pawn is worth 1 point. Okay, 1 point. You have a bunch of them. They're not really. They're still, every piece is valuable. Every point counts, but they're not, I guess, the most valuable point. Then we can say that a knight is worth 3 points. A bishop is worth 3 points. And remember how, like I said earlier, the knights can move in a 90-degree angle. The bishops can move diagonally. So it's kind of, you have to compensate you have to complement the pieces with each other. A rook is worth 5. So remember, let's keep track of the points here. Pawn is worth 1. Knight is worth 3. Bishop is worth 3. Rook is worth 5. A queen is worth 9. So a queen is your second most valuable piece. And what's a king worth? We can't assign a worth to the king. The king is the most valuable piece. You are forced to protect him. Even if you don't feel like the king's the most valuable, a lot of people might think, oh, the queen's better. The king can't even move. You're forced to protect the king whether you like it or not. You are legally forced in the game of chess to protect the king. So he is the most important piece. So another common thing you want to do, if you want to get all your pieces in the game, you want to get all your pieces in the game. So notice here at the start of the starting configuration, we have all our pieces here. Look how much board we have left here. We want to get all of our pieces, with the exception of a king. It's good to keep the king in the corner, but you want to get the rest of your pieces, and obviously protect the queen as well. You want to get the rest of your pieces into the board, into the playing field. That way, you can actually make use of them. What can the rook do here? Can't do anything. I mean, the knight can actually jump, but not effectively. Bishop can't do anything. Queen can move diagonally a bit, but that's because we moved that pawn. King is effectively limited. So all these pieces are limited. And obviously the pawns are not that good. So you want to get your chess pieces out of your back row and into the playing field so you can use all of them. And oftentimes you can't just say, hey, I have one piece here, I'm going to capture that piece. Against a worthwhile chess player, that won't work. You might need 4 or 5 pieces. And you might need to strategically position them just so you have the correct positioning to capture one piece. And so how can you actually get good at chess? We've went through the rules here. We've highlighted all of the basics. What are the ways to get good? First of all, you can't just sit here and watch a video, like a basic rule video, and expect to be good instantly. You're still going to get destroyed. Once you get good, once you start practicing, you watch some more advanced tip videos, you watch some of the best chess players, you see how they play. First of all, aside from all of that, the best way to get good is actually to play. It's actually to practice. Play lots of chess. Play as much chess as you can. You learn from every game, even the ones you win, even the ones you lose. The ones you win, you say, how can I improve my win? How can I make my win even better so that I lose less pieces? Oh, I lost this piece. How could I have won the game without losing that piece? You lose, you say, what did I do to lose? What could I have done differently? Don't ever put it on your opponent. Don't just say, oh, my opponent was too good, it's not my fault. Always look at things that you can improve yourself. Number 2, watch some chess lessons. There's a lot of good chess resources out there, because chess is a very popular game. And number 3, the best way to get good at something is actually to have fun while you're doing it. If you're miserable while you're playing chess, it's going to be hard to actually get good at chess. You have to have a mindset that not only wants to improve, but it has fun while you're doing it. And remember, even the best chess players have lost. And then there's some very long and entertaining chess matches on YouTube as well. And so, aside from that, what else should you do? Try to control the center of the board once, as I previously highlighted, as soon as you can. Most other moves aren't as good, although you can win with them. And that's basically the gist of chess. That's what we've learned. That's what we know. And I hope that was a good enough basic video to help teach you chess.